Because I just don't want to do it.
Like literally.
Literally, I have to do it. But,
Yeah.
all right, yeah, I'll get you guys so you guys can.
I think,
Yeah.
all right. We're good. Are we good?
All right. I'm just gonna do a quick thank you to our sponsors and viewers like
Can I just walk
you. You can.
I didn't know if it was just have you changed the ground rate?
Okay. Work through some techniques. No?
We gotta talk again
This is how you can tell I'm not.
with your outdoor.
Use my outside voice. Okay. Use my Washington Street voice. How about that? Okay, hello and welcome. Season Brain, season 11, 10. Can I not count? It's past the numbers on my hands, so you're stuck. I don't know. So welcome back. It's so happy to be back in person, and thank you for coming to this new location, Ashenome. Thank you, Ashenome, for hosting us. This is wonderful. If you haven't tried their ciders or food, 10 out of 10 we recommend. Before we get started talking about these amazing books with these awesome experts and author, so get ready with your questions. I just want to take a minute to thank Indiana Humanities for helping us organize this. Obviously, Indiana Sciences, the Indianapolis Public Library, and all of you, both in person and watching us through the live stream. We appreciate you, and we appreciate you being patient, and we appreciate you sticking with us. So with that, I'm ready to dive. We've been talking about this already, so I mean, y'all are gonna have to, y'all just get ready because I'm so excited. These, but I don't know. These were page turners for. I think I finished both of these books in like a week. I couldn't put them down, and I hope you all felt the same. So as we get started, my name is Allison. I'm your host. I will be guiding you through these conversations with these wonderful experts. And experts, introduce us. Who are you, and what should we know about you as we dive into AI and homeowner?
Okay, hi, I'm Paul Aller. I'm the Monster Mechanica. And also comic book editor and letterer, and there you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, applause. Really, truly awesome. And I already told you I have a lot of questions, so I hope you're ready. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ankur Gupta. Random things research-wise. I work on something called compressed data structure design, which is a fancy word for making Google work better. So I developed the search algorithm that you use on Google in 2004, and then I worked on a John Templeton grant to define wisdom from a computational perspective. So those are the two kind of weird things that I've done.
Weird? Is that the descriptor you're
That's
going
so,
with?
it's weird.
For coming and bringing your.
Pros from the list I saw, and
And I think there's a lot of introspection, I think, with all of our that we will be getting into. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So let's talk about AI. And at the beginning, and we were talking about this before we started, at the beginning of the book, they talk, about, they give a list of examples. Here's what AI is. Here's what AI isn't. But we're hearing this, I mean, in the news, it's AI, it's machine learning, it's deep learning. Is everything AI? Is there anything that's left that's not AI? Can you explain more about what it is and isn't?
Yeah, so in 2004, just to be about computer science, which is about trying to design computer algorithms that mimic human behavior on specific tasks. So, for example, you're trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B in a map. And AI is the attempt to try to develop a computer algorithm optimally. In other words, part of AI that so that's kind of the idea. Faster. And all of these other terms. All of this is AI. They're just different techniques to do that.
So it's more of an umbrella term.
AI is an umbrella. It's
We're talking about AI and pulling out all human logic and reason, and that's part of what I love so much about Hollow Heart and storyline. And I wanted to ask you, Paul, about how do you write about human issues and humanized storylines in the context of something that is seemingly meant to be devoid of that, and especially I know your book focuses a lot on empathy. So how do you construct that kind of story in that context?
I think you just have to think about how to how was it down to. So I wrote another book called Monster Mechanical, which also has a character. It's a bit of a common theme. In that case, it was Leonardo da Vinci's robot sidekick. In that case, that robot had known nothing but violence all its life. It was kind of turned on. It was designed for combat, so combat. So we dealt a lot with how that affected the way it viewed the world and the way it saw things. And in Hollow Heart, well, similarly, it doesn't have a lot of the sensory input that we have. So that's created like a goal. It doesn't know pleasure, it doesn't know love. And so it's created this extremely skewed and dark view of the book is about him sort of trying to break out of that view, but not quite.
Yeah. So do you think, I'm thinking about this in the context of both books. So I'm wondering, do you think that explains part of Elle's treatment because it's a robot? There's no, why do I need to apply human emotion to something that doesn't theoretically deserve it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there are people in the book that you would think of as the bad guys and you see doing things that we think of as evil, but I don't think anyone in the book is acting in a way that they would see as being evil, because exactly what you said, from their perspective, it's a machine, it's a tool. Why would you want to treat it as anything other than that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of what that narrative and your narrator throughout Colorado is so powerful. That part of why you want to choose Elle as the narrator. It seems like Elle is the narrator, maybe. Oh no.
No. That's interesting though. I feel like I shouldn't have said no because I like people thinking whatever they want to think. So perhaps.
Oh no. No, tell me what to think. I'm a millennial on the internet. Tell me what to think.
I mean, I intentionally didn't say who the narrator is. In my mind, it's a third party. I actually had an idea early on that because the narrator doesn't have read it, it's telling different stories about empathy throughout the book and tie into the main comic story. I had this notion that all the stories are about people who ended up as the organs in Elle's body. That doesn't really work because the narrator has personal relationships with several of them, and that was like a heck of a coincidence. So that was like a passing thought I had early on. Despite the fact it doesn't really work, I still kind of think of it that way.
That tracks with where my brain is. Okay, no. See, this is fine. And so I think, I think that's a great lead into our first turn and talk because I think both of these books do a really great demonstration of setting the limit to where AI is, what it is and isn't capable of, but also what it could be capable of or where it could go. So I know it's a sci-fi book, but like honestly, do we put it past bad scientists in 3050 to do something? Who knows? And so I thought this was a fun thought experiment for me. And so I wanted to give you all, as a turning talk, maybe some examples of AI not working well. So we think of AI as being, it always works. It does the things we want it to do. But as we saw, maybe that's not always the case. Maybe it's not always doing what we want it to do, or it's not having the end product that we expect. So do you have, in your turn and talk groups, can you talk about any examples where maybe AI did not do what you wanted it to do? I know we were talking about terrible Facebook ads. I buy one vacuum and it assumes I need 50, which maybe you live in a multi-million-dollar mansion where you need 50 vacuums. Terrible or just not helpful at all, which apparently it's designed to do that. So I'll give you like 10 minutes, maybe you come back and talk about our terrible AI stories because I feel like we all have them. Yeah. And then we can continue to talk. So it's like, how many live stream?
I have a smart TV.
And we can use
He like your screen records what I like.
Yeah. You're doing it.
Doesn't fit with my analogy, and I'm just suggesting I like it. I'm like, yo, it's like you want to know
Maybe it's in the research bit.
that was the first thing.
Or and or it's in the where it's not doing exactly what they wanted to because their ears are maybe you need to be realistic about what I don't really realistic about I guess. So maybe you can talk about
Okay, we're off to a weird start, Yoga.
There was a book I showed me. I love like the recipe. It was like chocolate cake. You need half a dice and like a sesame seed. It was wonderful. And the directions were like, it was, I remember it was wild. I will say, the cat names and who doesn't want to do the Hallmark? I'm sorry.
She dresses like designs. It is, right?
So my entire
I'm not saying like 4 or 5. Have you ever seen it? Can charge 30 cents more, and they do this until bar of soap is $1,300, and then they need to course correct. I like
and
that.
Bill Gates is going, that's a great price.
But yeah,
So,
Yeah.
shipping is-
yeah. So the short version of your answer is yes, we definitely mess up on AI stuff,
You
right?
have to wait until it seems like you put so much work into it, like especially when they talk about the effort put into like training the data set, and you get to the end, and then it just
Yeah.
doesn't do what you want it to do. I mean,
You don't have to start over from scratch. You can often figure out. So I mean, there are different pieces to that process. I don't want to talk about it forever, but there are different parts of it. And so if you determine that your error is in data set training, you go back and revisit that. You remove some outliers. You do some. I mean, and that's yeah. And AI is a common technique in data science, which is another really big buzzword. So yeah, it's all part of that process too. So.
okay, so I always feel so bad when they talk about all these AIs that fail. And they're like, oh, we're stuck from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's
I mean, L didn't start from scratch, right? So that's yeah.
So we need to know, there was I think racquetball. You know, with one of the other. I again, millennial on the internet. It's something in the gym that I don't do.
Right.
And they're playing racquetball with another iteration. It seems like similar to L.
Yeah.
So there was a lot that led up to the creation of L. And is L doing too well what they want, or maybe not well enough what they want?
Oh yeah. I think he's doing what they want up to a point, and then like they talk about it in that conversation that, like, you know, he may have reached the end of his usefulness, and that's why they let Mateo do what he does. They see it as a way to like milk a little bit more data out of it, because otherwise there's really no reason to have this thing around anymore.
Yeah. So was L designed to be a combat robot?
No.
Seems
No.
good at it. by the comic, he's pretty good. I mean, I'm just saying. Again,
That's fair.
like
I think that's just a plot construct. It's just how good he is at combat. No, L was just designed as a step, as a step to do research on, and to, like, you know, go and move on to the next step. So yeah. It's like how the Apollo missions would, like, you know, go a little bit higher and higher, and then they would orbit, and then like then they would reach the moon. So like if you think of those as being like the different robots, like each of them is like something we can do a little bit more with until we get to where we're going. And I never say where they're going because I didn't want it to matter, because I wanted to be L's story rather than the story of like what this company is actually doing. So I let the reader like figure out their own idea of what their end goal was.
Are you supposed to feel like what the company is doing is bad or good?
That's a good question. I don't know. I honestly hadn't thought about it, which I guess I probably should have. But
I spent the whole story trying to figure that out, because that was important to me to know.
Yeah.
You know, like, because I think it gave me a hint about what kind of intentionality the individual actors had in that game.
Yeah.
Like, are they doing it for profit or self-motivated greed, or are they doing it because of to cure cancer or some bigger thing, or
Right.
as a war robot? Like, I think that contextualizes the story in an interesting way.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like I got an answer, which
I can
made
see
it
that.
simultaneously interesting and terrifying.
Again,
like,
so much of it is from Mateo and Elle's point of view,
Right.
that like you're kind of locked into where you cut away, but you know, yeah, it's yeah. If I had like thought, should I answer this, I probably would have said no. So
Right,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Well, it's good that you didn't. It was fun.
Excellent, excellent. And now I'm thinking like, I'm trying to figure it out for myself, like as though I'm like just a reader, you know what I mean? I'm like, what's my opinion on that? So yeah. Which is I tend to sort of have the view with like the stuff that I write that like if I don't explicitly state it in the text, then I don't feel like my opinion is more valid than anyone else's. So that's why like I really did when I said no, that's not who the narrator was. I was like, no, I try not to say things like that, because I really do feel like, you know, yeah, like if I don't say it, then your opinion is just as valid as mine.
Yeah. But I love how you. Yeah. Is the company? Is the company good or bad? But I mean, you have a mix, right, of the people who on behalf.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some seem to be acting with empathetically towards Ellen. Some seem to be, you know, you're like, oh, that's good. And then some in the same company, the same building, same room, you're going, oh, that person is real bad. And so you're like,
Right.
yeah, are they doing this with maybe a good intention? And even if they were, does that justify what is making Elle feel that way? You know, and what is causing clear harm? But again, it's a robot. And if you're a person, if you're a computer science, your background is computer science, you were hired on to work on a robot. Do you care what the robot is feeling? Because it's not even real.
I was talking to someone about Donnie one time, and they were like, you know, how horrible it is that he's, you know, getting pleasure out of doing these things, and I'm like, I've gotten pleasure out of like welding on a punching bag. You know what I mean? Like, and I think from his perspective, yeah.
No, which is why it's so fun to read through Hollow Hearts. You can stop at any point and go, I could sit and think about this 5 different ways and have 5 totally different opinions on what's going on.
So I have a question for you too.
Sure.
Okay. So So let me know when we have to go back.
Oh,
But
yeah.
so yeah, um, I can ask it in the next break. Or, yeah, but whatever. It's we do experiments on lab rats to improve different things.
Yeah.
Does that parallel? Is that something you tried to create? That if he's just a lab rat, what distinguishes him
Right.
or L? I shouldn't say gender-wise, but from a lab rat, is it just
Yeah.
that they can emote what their experiences that somehow distinguishes them from? We kill rats every day,
Yeah.
so
Good question.
yeah, we kill lab rats every day. Is L different? Is L different than a lab rat?
Would it matter?
Did you say I worked in mice?
I worked with mice.
Oh, with mice.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. We, kill animals for the pursuit of science every day.
Yeah,
100,000s probably across the globe, beyond mice and rats.
Yeah.
Some people draw the line at what animal you use. Some people draw the line at animals, period.
Yeah.
Some people draw the line at cells and where the cells came from, and that's a huge ethical. So, that's why I think it's so interesting to think about that in the context of L. And at what point, clearly, some people have drawn that line and said, L is humanized enough that L is deserving of these things and deserving of the same human compassion and empathy.
Right.
And some didn't, and that totally dictated the way, even again in the context of the company, totally dictated the way they went about that.
Yeah.
And that's why every chapter I had to stop and I had to think about it. All right, I think we can come back, Rufus. See what I said? That initial question: when does AI go bad? Look at us. Look at us. Who would have thought? Okay. Yep. Who would have thought? Look at us. Not me. Okay. All right. So you probably went on similar tangents as to us, but we talked about obviously Facebook ads, terrible Facebook ads, terrible Google recommends. I hate it when my text recommends terrible words that I never use. Like, how is it predicting this word that I've never seen in my life and I don't know the definition of? How is that possible? But it does it every day. So in your turn, and we also ended up going into some other aspects of Hollow Heart, and we can talk about that as a group. But what are some examples that you guys came to in your turn in talks of just AI being programmed to work and do something for you that it just did not do? And I talked about ads, but yeah. 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 Yeah, it's advertised as a thing that knows it's a computer. Computers know all, and then it does not know all, and it seems frustrating for the end user. But I feel like when you're an expert and you work with AI every day, you probably know exactly how to game the AI to do exactly what you want, whereas maybe like an end user, a plebeian like myself, would not know how to use it appropriately.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are two things to remind yourself of when you're thinking about how AI behaves. The first is it's tuned to perform a very specific task. So if the thing that you're asking for deviates from that task, it gets confounded. It doesn't actually have a brain or do anything like that. It's a tool. Like if you try to, make an omelet with a hammer, it's not going to work out. Like
a really big one on a really big flame, I could make that happen. I'm just saying.
Pixar didn't happen. All right, so I think
I'm going to Home Depot.
And I think the second thing to think about is that when you let's say you Google Java, for example, is it going to tell you about coffee, the color, the country, or the programming language? How do you know which thing it's asking about? So,
Are you saying AI is not telepathic, telekinetic? Come on.
It's not, and it can't disambiguate a lot of human behavior for that reason, right? So a lot of times you know, it would have to use your search history perhaps to try to figure that out. But what if you're a programmer that really likes art? It still doesn't help. And coffee. And I think a lot of programmers do all three of those things, you know, that kind of thing. So anyways.
Yeah. Are we going to get to a point where it is telepathic? You can tell exactly what
I
mean.
hope not.
Yeah, that'll be another Google update from you in 10 years.
Not likely.
Oh, good to hear. Are there any other terrible AI examples that anybody had? Or even from, you know, we were talking in the context of, oh yeah, go ahead. Call AT&T? The voice recognition? You're preaching to the choir right here.
We're sorry.
Yeah, the tech, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the AI has trained us because now we know you have to give it a specific word. Here are the set of words it will recognize and will move you forward in the process. They don't tell you that, but we have learned that. We have Pavloved ourselves into like learning how to use AI. These companies are just, look at us. Who would have thought?
Well, and those words are carefully chosen so that they will sound different from each other regardless of your accent. So that it's easier for it to identify the difference between them.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. To that point, the discussionon was like the 2017 most played song in the U.S. And yet no people had the ability to hear and understand when they could play Despacito. Didn't understand.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was a hit all the way back in 2017 because that makes me very sad. But that's a great example. And that was actually something that will be a part of our next turn and talk. So I don't want to spoil our conversation. But I also really want to bring up what we were talking about in the context of Hollow Heart and AI and something that is programmed to do one thing and then it doesn't do that. And that's really the case with, it seems, with L. They developed L and it's seemingly others like L to perform some sort of task or to accomplish something. And either L doesn't do it or he's doing it too well and they're afraid. And so it seems like Hollow Heart kind of explores AI maybe not doing what it's meant to do or doing it too well and the human response and fear, I think, of that unknown.
Yeah, I think like I was talking about with, you know, thinking about what Elle had taken in, I think they didn't expect the reaction of it like experiencing some robotic form of pain to the point where it tried to escape. And they didn't see that coming because they got to the point where it was advanced enough that, you know, and again, like you were saying before the thing began, like this is not actual AI, you know, this idea of emoting and, you know, having its own will and desire, but, you know, it's science fiction. But yeah, they definitely didn't expect that. And that gave Mateo the opening to sort of go, well, if Elle is now at the point where they're experiencing certain emotions and sensations, I want to try to help them out and show them some other emotions and sensations and give them like what they seem to be craving or needing to be able to survive and get by.
Yeah, and I think that goes into some of the other things we talked about at what point, you know, we were talking about the example of like animal research. At, you know, at what threshold does it cross that you start to give it, you know, the robot or the animal that humanized empathy and that humanized emotion, and you feel it's deserving of that level of, you know, respect or that level of ethics. And that leads me into my next question for you, Paul. And I want to ask how you see that, I guess, that conversation developing around ethics and regulation, you know, around robots. You know, with Elle, it seems like different people had different thresholds. For, you know, Elle was deserving of empathy and kindness, and or, you know, we saw other characters not give Elle that empathy and kindness because he wasn't developed enough, advanced enough, human enough. I don't know. So I don't know.
I mean, I think if you are someone who and I think most of the scientists in the book fell into this category, if you're someone who draws a hard line in the sand that a machine is a machine and this is not a living being, then like that's not an unreasonable take, you know? I mean, that obviously the book doesn't hold that position through the narrative, but that's not some wild, crazy thing that they're thinking. So yeah, and again, like we're, you know, there's no actual machine AI that is going to take on emotions and have all that. So it's a bit of an academic, but like you said, it does raise the question of, you know, animal experimentations and the way we view, where we other, you know, other humans as well, and we can kind of reduce them to the idea of being something akin to a machine by like mentally rejecting their humanity or mentally rejecting their autonomy.
Yeah, well, and not just the autonomy of L as an individual, but L is an amalgamation of individual human parts.
Right.
And so do those human parts, are they not deserving of that respect and that level of ethics because they are now a part of a robot? It seems like the answer is pretty split through the narrative and through the story. I mean, is that, and even within the company, and that's what something we were talking about, you know, in our turn and talk, you know, is the company, is it, this idea of good and bad is very mixed throughout the story. You don't really get a, and I don't know if you can finish a story and really feel like you came to a conclusion or a consensus.
Right.
And maybe that's the intention. I don't know.
I would say that was the intention. Yeah. I in all my books, like we were talking about before, I tend to lean really heavily into ambiguity and into not giving the answers, and sort of like I was telling them during the break, I feel like if I don't say something in one of my books, then at that point the reader's opinion, the reader's take on it is just as valid as mine. So I really do feel like, you know, my viewpoint is limited to what I put into the text, and beyond that, you know, your interpretation of it is as good as mine. But I get to be up here.
Yeah. Well, we want to hear your interpretation, because
No,
there's so many. I mean, I mentioned that after every chapter, you could look at each character after every chapter and their viewpoint and their vantage point, and the good or bad assessment totally shifts the entire time throughout the book. I think it comes back to like this hard line of at what point does a robot, humanized robot or roboticized human?
I would say humanized robot, just because of the fact, I think one of the things that makes us human, and you know, this is just my opinion, is the way we interact with the world through our senses. You know, the 5 senses that most of us have, or less, you know, for some people. But that's just such a tremendous part of what makes us who we are, and what shapes and informs who we are, is just the way we take in the world. And Elle takes in the world in an extremely different way. There are parts in the book where they're able to basically create their own sensation. They talk about how they're like, I don't remember what exactly it was, like they're smelling music or something like that. They're like scrambling up those sensations. And so, to me, I'm not saying it makes them less alive, but I think it makes them something different than being human when the way they interpret the world is so radically different.
Yeah, I don't know. Smelling music might be pretty cool. Elle might be onto something.
Yeah.
And I think that leads me into actually my follow-up for you, because I think it's interesting. You know, You Look Like a Thing and I Love You focuses a lot on setting up the training data and setting up the input before you even get to the AI performing a function. There's so much work that goes on in the front end. And I think what's unique about Elle is that Elle is able to do that himself. Elle is able to like find his own sensory, do his own sensory input. And he needs assistance maybe processing that and what it is and how to categorize that, but he's able to do that own input. Whereas I think you wish that maybe your algorithms could train themselves, but it seems like there's a lot of work on the front end. So from a research perspective, what does that process look like?
I mean, data cleaning and processing and all of that does have several automated tasks. There are rote automated things that you do. A lot of what happens when you do data processing is that you try to infer or apply your insights or knowledge about that data to judge or guide the AI into a particular kind of decision. To make that a lot less vague, let's take the list of passengers from the Titanic. This is a very classic example. A bunch of people died on the Titanic. Spoiler alert, in case you weren't aware. But we have this feeling that women and children lived a lot more than men did. And if you took all of the passenger data, information about their demographic information, and then coupled that with their survival or death, you could probably try to see, can you predict whether or not they would have lived if you didn't have that information? And you would want, as a researcher looking at that data, to say, well, I think that gender and age had something to do with the survival rate of a particular passenger. Let's check if that's right. So then you could do some simple analysis to try to figure that out. And this might give you a way to sort of guide the algorithm to giving you better prediction rates if you were to say, judge that, right? So that's the human part of it, right? Like having domain expertise and knowledge about the data that you're dealing with very much can help an AI, but you can also introduce unintended biases. So without going too long, I'll just give one more example. Ford Motor Company at one point had said, we would like to design an AI to figure out who the most successful candidates are going to be throughout time. And then we'll just hire those people. It seems like a really good idea, right? That you just say, okay, among all the candidates, these are the ones that say reasonably were promoted twice in 18 months or something like that. These are heavy hitters. They're going to do very well. We should hire those people. And the data that they fed in was data from 1950 to 1995. And you can probably guess the through line here. It said white males should be hired and promoted exclusively. Now, is that the fault of the algorithm that evaluated that data? No, but that is the behavior of the people who were hiring in those years, that they heavily prioritized a certain kind of demographic and disadvantaged others, right? So you sometimes have to look at data with, and take a grain of, take it with a grain of salt and maybe modify it or adjust that data set to sort of more closely align with what your real goals are, right? So data is not infallible, and data is data. It doesn't have any feelings necessarily, but you may have to interpret that differently depending upon what your experience is. So that's all. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you end with the data is data.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what a lot of people use that as an excuse. Oh, data's data. I don't know, what are you talking about bias? The data's the data. It's a computer. It doesn't have any bias. But that's demonstrably untrue. I mean, the data can have bias, and you need to factor that in downstream in your interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, the data represents biased behavior, right? So then you have to suss out that bias and then determine if that's a bias you want or a bias you do not want. And I gave two examples, one in which you want the bias to be there because it helps your prediction in Titanic, and one where you do not, because otherwise you will perpetuate the status quo of hiring certain kinds of people. So,
like, as I was thinking of that, as you're talking, like it seems like it'd be nearly impossible to strip that bias out. Like if you okay, well, we'll just look at their education, not the demographics. Well, their education will be determined by their place in society and certain centuries-old privileges. And it's like as you're talking, my brain kept on thinking of like different iterations of what I would try, and I kept on going, nope, that wouldn't get rid of it either. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, and figuring out how to separate those residual factors from intel. Like, for example, if a candidate has an apartment number, unfortunately that says something about who they are and where they're from, right?
Huh.
Does their address have an apartment number in it or not? Such a weird thing to say, yes, that has an effect. But like once you start thinking about these things, you're like, well, damn, we're screwed. Like that's pretty much what you think. So and a lot of times it's not that any particular person who's building or evaluating an algorithm is terrible. They just may miss something that the computer picks up because it's evaluating, millions of records and can find patterns where humans can't. So,
when you think of the scale of it, truly, it makes it a little more understandable how it happens. I mean, I couldn't imagine sifting through that many data points with all those different factors in each data point and going, let me find the one trend that's real important, or probably multiple. And that brings us actually into our turn and talk. I wanted to ask you about other biases that maybe you've seen in AI or you could think of developing in AI. And I mean, we mentioned, every time you think of one, you go, oh, well, I don't know if you could, correct for that. How would you not have that bias? How would you, what's another indicator or something else, like another output that you could look at that maybe avoids that bias? And I think that the resume example is great. And so in your turn and talk, my question to you is, what are other biases that you could think of that an AI might have that maybe is unknowing, and maybe it's the bias in what is recommended to you in your feed, biases in the words that are recommended to you in your text to speech, or in your text prediction, even maybe cultural biases, depending on where the AI was generated versus where it's used, might have biases in what the products it's giving to you. So I'm going to give you like 10 minutes to talk about AI biases and all the different potential biases, including the examples maybe that we came up with and how terrible some of them are. Yeah, because that's.
And some of them are indeed terrible.
Some of them are just off, and some of them you really don't think about until you see the output. You go, hold on.
All right.
We made an oopsie, and we need to redo. And there are a lot of examples like this. I mean, if you Google just a little bit about it, you'll find all sorts of things. For those in the audience, you may very well have heard about a very famous Target situation. So Target designed an AI to figure out who to market certain products to, because they figured if we send coupons to people who buy certain products or use certain products, then they'll spend that money here instead of somewhere else because they have a coupon.
Okay, makes sense. I like a coupon.
So what they did is they did this thing, and the AI that they used became very, very good at predicting pregnancy. Very, very good at predicting pregnancy. That certain people they buy, for example, prenatal vitamins, or they tend to prefer sour food, or they tend to, and so then when a particular person's habits drastically change, then this happens. So what they did is, unfortunately, the AI was so good, it predicted a 14-year-old that was pregnant and had not told her parents that she was pregnant. And so coupons went to the family, and the father was like, why am I getting coupons about diapers and all of these things? And he went to the store and complained and yelled at them, like, what is wrong with you? I have a daughter and I don't want to have to explain all of this. And then like a week later, she told him that I know why. And it had predicted that she was pregnant, even though she was not showing her anything else. So that's an example of AI being so good that, in fact, they had to dial it back and stop it from learning that much.
Can I tell you, not only did I hear about that, but something happened to me a couple months ago that was so creepy and made me think of that, where like I started getting targeted ads for multiple sclerosis treatments. And I thought of that and I was like, oh my God, is this like a thing? And after a couple of weeks, they went away. So I think it was just some weird blip of something that I Googled or something. But like, because of that, I was like legitimately walking around for a couple of weeks going like, does the algorithm know that I have this terrible thing that I don't know about?
Yeah, if you Googled 3 symptoms that happen to match with that, then they will start suggesting
that's fascinating.
Yep, it happens.
I had not heard of that. I don't, what, you're like, oh, everyone's heard of it. No, that is terrifying.
But I mean, on the other hand, the algorithm was very, very good. So, and the data was clean and everything. Like, none of the problems I described earlier were problems, right? Like, it did everything exactly but human beings had a tolerance for what is too good, and we don't like that.
Wow.
So are we limiting the capability of it? Are we afraid of like an L?
In some cases, we have to, because I mean, computers, for example, can sometimes piece together data from other places to individually identify you. Data privacy is a big issue, right? Like, we definitely don't want to be de-anonymized when we're on the internet, like, or even if you're not de-anonymized as an individual, if you're de-anonymized as a class of, I'm a single black male who lives in this zip code, and likes tacos, you know, that's not a thing you want to be identified with, right? So like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
yeah, like when you're Googling, you know, Fortnite, you don't want somebody to send you taco ads because they just happen to know you like
They figured
tacos.
out
Yeah,
who
they don't
you are,
want,
yeah.
yeah, you don't want them to do that either. Have tolerance for what's considered creepy, right?
Yeah.
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 That's fair.
Information and deduction in and of itself isn't good enough, right?
Yeah. I remember my ex one time, like on Facebook, we weren't like, you know, a couple on Facebook official or whatever. And on her birthday, Facebook didn't send me the normal birthday ad. It seemed like this thing that said like, do you want to wish happy birthday to this person, like in real big letters. I was like, what the? And I realized it's because my face was in her profile picture, and we had never interacted on Facebook other than being friends, never tagged each other or anything. But it saw my face in her profile picture and was like, they're important to her. So yeah, wild.
I'm throwing my computer off the hook. I cannot. And you know what? I'm so glad you brought up data privacy, because that is a huge concern,
Yeah.
and especially, you know, I know that that's a concern with AI, and in particular medical records, electronic health records, and you know, a lot of tech companies, including Google, have this new
Right.
health push, and they're trying to push health data. And they, you know,
Right.
but also Google has your location, and you went to a hospital, and then now you know, we know exactly when you were at the hospital, and then now you have this on your EHR, and we can use this to identify you, and we can sell
Right.
that information to your
Right.
insurance companies, anonymized,
Right,
de-identified, and
right.
then now we know you have a pre-existing condition, and
Right.
we, you know,
Yeah.
there's fear of discrimination and bias,
Right.
in that way. That is one, reality,
Yeah.
and two, terrifying.
Well, but the same data set that you're concerned about with data privacy, wouldn't you want them to tell you if you have early onset cancer?
Oh,
Absolutely, right?
yeah.
It's the same data. So
Yeah.
now the question is, how do you weaponize it to do one thing and not the other? When it's trying to build inferences to learn about you, to figure out how to predict. It doesn't know what's a good inference and what's a bad inference, what's an acceptable inference and
Yeah.
what's not. I mean, we as people managing, developing, identifying those algorithms have to steer the algorithm in a direction that manages those pitfalls, navigates those landmines.
Yeah. Well, I think we come back to like the scientists working with elves, and are they working for good or bad? Is
Right.
it good action or bad action? Because
Right.
you know, you are wholesome and you feel a need to steer your algorithms in the context of good.
Yeah.
But with L's situation, are they steering, you know, L's development in for good or
Yeah.
for, you know, evil? Like,
I also think when you're looking at specific examples, it's kind of a moot point because the technology exists. And even if these people are doing it for good, you know, like when you were saying, like, are we limiting the AI? I think anytime we discuss limiting that, we always have to add for now, because that's not going to last.
yeah.
So yeah, I almost think that like if the technology can be abused, it's going to be abused. So it's kind of beside the point whether these people are abusing it once it's out there.
Were the actors in the story from the company, were they shutting L down because they were trying to limit it, or because they had the next prototype set?
I think they were just done with their usefulness. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that wasn't clarified in the
Right.
text at all.
Right. No, it's not.
I mean, that's great.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I read a lot of things that have answers, so it was refreshing to read things that don't.
That's
right?
nice,
So-
because I do a
Yeah.
lot of criticism of my books. A lot of reviews do say, like, you know, we needed to know more, and I was like, sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't feel like you did.
Maybe if you had a discussion page at the end. These
Yeah.
are the discussion questions you should be thinking about that I chose not to answer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I did.
Ironically, the only book we talked about that did that was a book written by a scientist, a research scientist.
Yeah.
Put a
Yeah.
list of like 30
Yeah.
discussion questions.
Like to say, hey,
Wow.
listen, I'm still not going to answer these questions, but now at least you have some way to directly.
On the complete other side,
Yeah.
one of David Lynch's, I think either Inland Empire or Mulholland Drive, he put out a list of like David Lynch's 10 questions to ask yourself to understand this story.
Right.
And it was like, yeah, again,
Right.
no answers, just like, you know, stuff like, you know, who gives someone else a red flower and what could that mean? You know, and like,
Oh no.
yeah.
I feel like you just sent me down a spiral. But that's why I asked you if we were going to get more from Hollow Heart, because I was like, I have so many questions about the prologue, everything that led up to L. What was the intention? Was it good? Are we steering L? You know, are we steering for good? Are we steering for bad? Is this combat? I was like, oh, I have so much in my head. This could be a part of the MCU.
Yeah.
All right. So we talked about a lot of biases.
No idea.
I think both work.
Yep. All right. From the author, I heard both work, so I'm going to continue using my Southern public education to pronounce words the best I can. So, oh no.
This table's having fun.
Yep. If anyone's brain just like shot off, mine just turned off for like 2 seconds. All right, so coming back from our turn-in talks, we talked about bias in a very abstract concept. Did any of you come up with any interesting, either real, like lived experience of AI having a bias? Was it funny? Was it bad? Was it terrible? It could be even maybe examples from the book. Did anybody have any 8 bias examples? Yeah.
But still.
Yeah. 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 So for those of you on the live stream who maybe didn't hear, you mentioned the policing example that's used in the book. The AI sees, okay, we're getting more, increased cases here. We should put more policing here. But then you have more observations. So more people, more observations, and it's a positive feedback loop. And you say, okay, there's something happening here. But I mean, you were talking about the AI doesn't know any better. The AI is just doing its job.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really great example of it noticed a thing. It said do more here, and then you notice more things, and the robot says, yes, I did a good, and it's not good. Yeah.
Hey, how about some wedding ads? You get married. Hey, you need a lot of assumptions.
Wow.
I just got married a month ago. Let me tell you. I'm still on the wedding ads, but now I'm into the family. Everything now is family oriented. Because you have a family, you're a married one. And girl, when did that happen? Not today. Yeah.
Really showing that bias is what we expect. Don't know the guys,
Yeah.
definitely but what they expect for each stage of your life.
Yeah. Absolutely. The gender and sex bias is so obvious in so many things. And you were talking of, I want you to talk about the Target story. Because I had never heard of the Target the Target debacle. And so maybe some of you, this is also news.
So I'm sorry in advance for what I'm about to tell you.
No, it's fascinating.
So I don't know if you've heard about the very famous Target targeting ads at particular groups of people. So Target executives thought, hey, we can send targeted coupons about specific products to people who shop at Target. And the idea is if we give them coupons for a thing, they'll come and shop here more. So they sort of created a bunch of categories and tried to predict what kind of shopper you were. Are you a bread and milk kind of person? Do you tend to get clothes there or whatever? And one of the things it became very, very good at is predicting pregnancy. Very, very good at predicting pregnancy because based on, your tastes suddenly change. You buy prenatal vitamins, those kinds of things. And it was so good at predicting, it actually predicted that a 14-year-old was pregnant before she started showing. And they sent a bunch of coupons to her house where her father saw them and was inundated with coupons for diapers and Enfamil and all of these kinds of things. It was like, and he went to Target and he yelled at them and he's like, what are you doing? Why are you sending me this? You know, there's no way that this is relevant or anything. And a week later, she told him that she was pregnant. And Target got huge backlash for this particular event, so much so that they actually had to pull the algorithm, which, by the way, used correct data that was clean and predicted correctly, but it predicted so well that humans they were not comfortable with that tolerance level. And so Target actually had to pull back a successful, very highly effective algorithm because it was too good.
I feel like I could see like a diagonal line, like one axis is helpful, the other is creepy. And there's like, you know, you got to figure out where that line is, where the creepy tolerance for how helpful it is. Yeah.
Maybe that's your next book.
There you go.
It explores the creepy line.
I think Hollow Heart explores that line. I mean, each character is forced to make that decision. And maybe less creepy. Maybe creepy is not the right axis for Hollow Heart, but I think it's like human, robot, and everyone has a different threshold. And we talked about this earlier. For you know, where on that threshold am I giving it what I would give a human, and where on that threshold am I not giving it what I would give a human? And I mean, in this context, sorry to the AI, I guess. Maybe that the Target AI already crossed my threshold. I'm sorry that you were too good.
Yeah. Speaking to your point, I think you actually do explore the ethics axis instead of the creepy axis.
Oh,
here,
absolutely.
Right. So that,
because I mean, that's something we have to think about in its application. You know, my AI is too good, and it is concerning other people, and it is having very real world impacts on these families.
Right.
And very personal impact on these families. And we're just talking about an algorithm for coupons. You know, maybe coupons in Southern Living. And so, I mean, you know, in the book it talks about, oh, don't worry, we're not in a creepy place. We're nowhere close to a creepy, but it seems like we kind of are already. I mean, maybe it's the background we don't recognize it. I mean, who would have recognized, you know, the Target scandal if it had been, you know, had an immediate familial impact, you know?
I mean, we hear about creepiness every day. Data privacy is a conversation that everybody has, right? And it's because we don't like the idea of this, you know, metaphorical big brother looking over our shoulder and feeding us positive ads about whatever we're doing in life because it feels like somebody's watching you, right? So, I mean, we are worried about that already. So, I mean, algorithms are surprisingly good at detecting patterns when you have a giant populace. And speaking to your point about, you know, women get ads about birth and weddings and all of this thing, it's not because they're stereotyping you, because most women get married, have children, and buy a lot of diapers, and then, you know, they do whatever they do these things. Most women do that, and AI in general is a technology based on prediction and pattern matching, and therefore inherently stereotyping, right? That's fundamentally what it is.
So does that mean that, because presumably a roughly equal number of men are also having babies at the same time, does that mean they're not out there shopping for diapers, for formula, for all of these things, if they're not getting those ads?
Men do not get served ads about diapers.
Yeah.
But and again, like, so
they get served ads about beer and.
if AI isn't making that choice, that's because men as a group aren't pulling their share, correct?
I mean that's a fair way to interpret it. That's a fair way to interpret it. Or it could be that, you know, men have no decision-making power when it comes to buying those things, right? Like, it's like, I will go and purchase the thing that my wife told me to buy, right? And again, this is a purely stereotypical, wildly inappropriate conversation from that point of view. But the point is that, you know, these algorithms sort of pick up on some of those things, right? If you serve 10,000 ads to men and not one of them ever clicks on a link, it's because they have no agency. The algorithm figures that out, and then it serves fewer until it serves none. And then you're perpetuating this circumstance where a man who might want to explore diapers can't, because they won't get an easy link on Facebook to do so. So
yeah, we can go. We're going right into Q&A because this is fascinating. So you can go ahead. Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's interesting. One life event, it totally changes what is recommended to you. Yeah, we talk about marriage and divorce. I mean, it totally changes. Yeah. So that's fascinating. That and also, like, again, we're talking about the creepy axis, but maybe it's less the creepy axis and more we're afraid of what does it do? What the I say robot as a general term. Another umbrella for an umbrella. A robot, what it's capable of. I mean, to me, reading through, Elle's storyline, it's what what is it capable of? We didn't expect this.
Mhm.
It was designed to do X. It did X. Now there's more. I wasn't ready for more. We gotta roll this back. We gotta figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it seems like it's very much a tale and different, maybe thousands of years apart. So I think there is an ethics conversation opened up with Hollow Heart.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. And so I know there was another hand in the back. Did you? Yeah. Yeah. So it's intentional, more intentional.
I don't think that's generally true. I think a lot of times people feel as if, these big actors, Google and these kinds of companies are skewing the algorithms because they have certain biases and they're trying to sort of provide that same impressionable bias on the search results. That's typically not the case. It's typically the case that when you think about what an algorithm of this kind is doing, it is playing the pattern matching game. So let's say that you have 10,000 people that behave one way and 100 people behave a different way. These algorithms can't easily protect the minority in every situation because it's not going to succeed at the task, which is generating sales, for example, right? So it's not a nefariously based decision that's coming from this algorithmic choice to serve one ad over another. It's more that the likelihood of success of making a sale increases if you pander to the majority than the minority. Now, Google does address this to some extent, but you very rarely see it because it doesn't 100% serve an ad to everybody when it determines a primary thing. It also serves minority ads. So like it may have a 90% chance of serving you the beer ad as opposed to the diaper ad, but it'll serve the diaper ad every so often. And then maybe if you hit it, then it knows something very strong about you, that you're in a minority group, and it can further classify you.
Hmm.
So, I mean, and now you may think of that as a bad thing, but if you think of it purely as a emotion-free decision making, what it's basically doing is saying, maybe, interested? Like it's kind of like testing you out and saying, what do you think about this? And if you never respond positively to it, then it stops serving you those ads, right? And more often than not, serving you ads for a minority group isn't going to pan out. So then it eventually purges that.
I think it's also fascinating to me that we sort of like assign a different type of intelligence to AI. They actually have it's an easy shorthand to say the AI knows if you're pregnant. The AI has no idea what the concept of pregnancy is. The AI just knows people who buy prenatal vitamins X number of months later buy diapers.
Right.
And that's kind of fascinating. That
Right.
but we, rather than thinking that way, we shortcut it and think it has like a larger type of intelligence than it actually does.
I'm really glad you actually said that, because we as human beings also have a much higher standard for success for AI than human beings. For example, if you think about the self-driving car situation, we're not okay with a self-driving car that crashes 3% of the time. We're not okay with that. But human beings crash way more than 3% of the time, right? So our standards for what an AI should do are way higher. Even if it behaves exactly the same as a human, we're not okay with that. We want it to somehow be an epitome of all beings forever and never make a mistake. And no human has ever done that. And humans are the ones who are designing these algorithms. So they're going to be fallible, right? So
yeah, I almost brought up self-driving cars when we were talking about the idea of like these AIs having like huge impacts on people's lives. I was going to say, like, we're going to get to the point pretty soon where AIs are on a regular basis making a decision on like should the driver die or should the pedestrian die? And again, I'm doing the same thing I just said. I'm like giving them a sort of intelligence they don't have. But yeah, like you just made me realize like drivers make that decision all the time and with much greater frequency.
Right.
But I understand, because I understand a driver's brain. So I understand why they made that decision. A computer's brain is completely opaque to me, so if you have a computer deciding who dies is, ugh.
Yeah.
Choose a technical term.
Yeah. It's something in computer science we call the black box fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the idea that if you don't know what's in the box, you fear it more than you respect it. And this is a very common tendency, right? You fear what you don't understand. And I'm not saying it like, you know, to you and I'm somehow better. Everybody does this, right? Like people who surf, I am afraid of all of those people, right? Like they how they do this, I have no idea, you know. So and we use cars every day. Can anybody take their car apart, and put it back together? No one can do that. But we're totally fine with, you know, turning the key or pressing the button and going somewhere. And with great confidence, we feel it will not spontaneously explode. You know, so like, you know,
Hopefully. I hope.
most likely.
Yeah.
We'll serve you an ad if it does. So.
Yeah, fire extinguishers. Yeah. Suggestions are amazing. First off, the Halloween costumes happening.
So as a computer scientist, first of all, we're nerdy and want to do funny things. That's generally that. So, you know, some of those came from that. But also we'd like something that is something that humans can uniquely identify, but computers have no contextual information to know. So you're really testing the gap between what they've been able to ascertain from data fed to them and their learning process, as opposed to what a human would say. Like if you had a name called Mr. Diddles, you wouldn't think that that's the name of a butler, right? It's obvious that it would not be that, right? Or it's a ridiculous thing, whereas a computer may not figure that out. And I think, you know, that's neat. And I actually have a similar question about the book in that sense. Like, does Elle ever have any of these kinds of things where the decisions there that Elle is making are sort of obviously wrong or right to the other people in the story, but not to Elle? Like, for example, when the guy got beaten to an inch of his life,
right,
very near the beginning, you know, that was considered normal to Elle, or was it understood to be not normal?
I think it was normal to Elle, because yeah, I think Elle is just operating off of what they need, and what Mateo does is he expands the idea of what Elle realizes that they're capable of having, and so that in turn expands what Elle wants and needs, and that causes Elle to like act in ways that they hadn't before. To, you know, I didn't know pleasure was an option on the table. Now that I know pleasure is an option on the table, I will kill you to get it. So yeah, but no, I don't think Elle would have thought of any of that as being abnormal.
Yeah. Well, and if you're a robot and that's an option, and you click it, and there's no moral value ascribed,
right?
You say, okay, that's an option. Let's go. That gets me to what I want. And you know, whether it's the robot stacking all of its limbs to get from point A to point B, you know, and falling over, which I love. I love basic symbols. You're absolutely. It's a very similar example. I love that. And I think you mentioned Elle smelling sounds and like hearing music and like describing a smell. Any of us would be like, I'm sorry, Beethoven smells like what? But for Elle, it's like, cinnamon buns.
And beyond that, like I think one of the things that makes L not human is that they're able to bring up those sensations at any time. So like we can like remember what it's like to eat chocolate cake. L can just taste chocolate cake at any point once they've learned how to control that.
Now you just got me real one jealous and two hungry. So I just finished the chocolate cake I made last week.
There you go.
And I think that's a great spot to end for now. As we're right at time. I just want to thank you two so much for being our experts and our wonderful experts and really diving into these topics. And I want to thank our partners, Indiana Sciences, Indiana Humanities, Central Indiana Science Outreach, and then obviously our wonderful venue, Ash and Elm, thank you. And also your cider rocks, not a paid ad or sponsorship. It was really good. And I'm excited to be here. And thank you to all of you for coming and all of the viewers like you. So thank you so much. And we will see you next month. I think we're talking about Canary in the Coal Mine, I believe. Yeah. And I also am excited to talk about that. And so I'm excited to see you guys next month and have a good month. Enjoy fall.
Yeah.
It's fake fall.
Hopefully so.
I quit Indiana. I quit the Midwest.
All right.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
No
Oh,
problem.
this is great.
Are we answering questions or anything, or we're just okay?